Welcome to the first of a series of open discussions from the H Club. This is a series called the Open Discussion, which is going to focus on different industries each week. We'll be joined by leading voices who will discuss the changing landscape of their industry and what the future could look like. We have exciting sessions on theatre, film and music coming down the line, but today we're focusing on television. So let me introduce our panel. Our first panellist set up Red Production Company in 1998 and has produced some of the UK's most popular and award-winning series, working with writers like Russell T Davies, Danny Brocklehurst and Sally Wainwright. Her credits include BAFTA award-winning Happy Valley, A Last Tango in Halifax. Recently, she was appointed CCO of Studio Canal UK, where she'll be in charge of spearheading a new in-house film production to develop British films. Hi, it's Nicola Shindler.
Hello.
Since the creation of Fulwell 73, our next panellist has produced and exec-produced television and feature films, including Hitsville, The Motown Story, Iron Bolt, The Class of '92, and Sunderland Till I Die, many of them winning Emmys and Grammys. As well as this, he's the managing partner of the Fulwell 73 group, heading up all commercial matters, both in the UK and US. It's Leo Pearlman.
Hi.
As head of specialist factual at Channel 4, our next panellist is responsible for history, science, natural history, arts and adventure. Her department produced everything from SAS to Grace and Perry, Guy Martin to Three Identical Strangers. Before joining Channel 4, she was commissioning editor for Origin at the BBC, where she commissioned, amongst others, the award-winning Muslims Like Us and We Are British Jews. It's Fatima Salaria.
Hello.
And last but certainly not least, our final panellist is a comedian, author, screenwriter and television presenter. He created and presented with Frank Skinner hit shows like Fantasy Football and Baddiel and Skinner Unplanned, as well as acclaimed documentaries, including most recently Confronting Holocaust Denial on BBC Two. He's published 7 successful children's books and 4 adult books as well. And his show, My Family, Not the Sitcom, ran on London's West End for 15 weeks and was nominated for an Olivier Award. It's David Baddiel.
Hello.
So welcome to all 4 of you, and thank you for joining us if you're watching us on this panel. If you have any questions for our panel, we will have time for that hopefully at the end of the session. Just send your question in the message box and we'll try to get to those later. So I think let's start just winding back a bit. Challenging times for everyone. Let's just go back to what you were doing when lockdown happened. What were you working on and how have you coped with the implications of the coronavirus? Let's start with Leo.
Wow, going back to before the coronavirus, that doesn't seem like real life. As a company, we had 16 or 17 shows in production across the US and the UK. Everything from scripted pilots for network season in the US. We had a feature film, Cinderella, was in the middle of shooting at Pinewood on the stages there. With the Late Late Show going on in the US on a nightly basis. And a whole host of other projects that were, I guess, timely related to what was going on or what should have been going on this summer around the Euros, around Glastonbury, etc. Overnight, all 17 of those were shut down, pretty much, and we had to look at ways to reimagine some of them for a new world, how we could continue production, but under the corona restrictions, and the rest we had to put on hold and wait to see what happened. I think we were quite lucky in that we managed to get 4 shows back up and running, all of which under new processes and new guidelines. But yeah, it's been a significant change, and certainly the biggest one that I've witnessed in this industry in the time that I've been in it.
Fatima, what about yourself at Channel 4? What's happening there with you guys?
So quite similar to what Leo was saying, we were in the midst of planning a big season around climate change for when that was going to happen, and we just had routines where we'd commissioned a whole load of programmes around that. So obviously a lot of them were abroad and some of them were going to be going to places that we knew that we were never going to get to. So my first week was like a blur in the sense that I was basically waking up and talking to lots of indies and lots of producers about what was salvageable and what wasn't salvageable, and kind of trying to assess a grid of what was, you know, what we were going to be able to film and what was going to fill our schedules. And at the same time, I just signed off a series called Putin, a Russian spy, that transmitted. And we had thought that all of the archive had come out of Russia of what we wanted. And there was a really scary couple of weeks because a lot of the archive hadn't come out. So we were, James Rogan, who was working on that, we were desperately trying to make sure that we had got all of that archive, as well as kind of trying to see how we could film the last series of Britain's historic towns when all of the historic towns were basically closing down and everything was going into lockdown. So it was a really, really difficult kind of week, which kind of went on. It's such a blur now, but you know, I'd kind of worked through 9/11 and 7/7, and I'd never felt this kind of pressure, or you know, I'd ever felt this kind of world at all before. So it was really difficult and really hard on so many levels for so many people.
And I guess quite a few tough decisions had to be made in those first few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the hardest part of it, where you as a commissioner are championing and working so hard with indies over months on ideas that you absolutely love, and you've worked really hard with them trying to get those signed off and trying to get those made, and then to have to pick up the phone and talk to them about how we might not be able to make those programs anymore, because the financial landscape was just moving every day. Having to talk to freelancers who, you know, whose jobs were basically gone, and try and make sense of that for them and manage a team, and try to, you know, stay on top of everything that was coming. So it was, you know, a huge hurricane of lots of things happening all at once.
David, you, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you were in the middle of a tour, or perhaps preparing for a tour, is that correct?
That's correct. No, I had done about 27 dates of a 55-date tour. In fact, tonight I should be at Queen Elizabeth Hall for the last date of the tour, and then I was going to go to Australia. I did have flights booked to Australia to go and do a 3-week tour in Australia and a couple of dates in New Zealand, and those in particular feel part of a previous world. I mean, the dates of my tour in the UK have been rather optimistically rescheduled till mainly November, October and November. I have no confidence that theatre will be reopening then, and actually I had a play that was on in October, November at the Soho Theatre that was due to transfer to the West End, and again I had a conversation yesterday, a Zoom meeting about that possibly happening next spring. But as I'm sure we will discuss, all the meetings that I've been having at the moment about any project have an element of fragility about them, as to, you know, you find yourself in a Kafkaesque situation of talking in quite detail about what you might do, what you might film. You talk about scripts, and then you think, yeah, but is any of this actually going to happen? In terms of television, I had just before lockdown, it may have even been the last meeting they had at the BBC. I had a meeting with BBC Two about a new documentary. You mentioned my documentary, Confronting Holocaust Denial. So we're thinking about doing another thing, calling it Confronting, about online hate. And I had a meeting with the BBC about that. And I think, you know, that is going to be commissioned, but literally the next day, all meetings at the BBC seem to be stopped. So we're still talking about that. I'm doing that with Wall to Wall and the BBC. We're still talking about it, but who knows when it will be filmed. Actually, as it happens, I had a comedy drama with Channel 4, Left Bank and Channel 4. That's gone. Channel 4 said they can't do that at the moment. So that, you know, there's a few things I could go on and on, but all of them feel a bit like to mention them is a bit mysterious. It's a bit foggy to mention them, because like I have a drama project with Left Bank that might be with ITV, or it might not, because it needs complete rewriting if we're to set it post the pandemic. So these are all things to discuss. One thing I probably would say though is it's a sort of interesting time for writers, in that there seems to be a lot of development and a lot of writing going on, but it's a bit writing in the dark, I would say.
Mm. Nicola, if I can move to you. I mean, I started at my new job from ITV at Viacom in February. So for me, I think I've been in the office 3 weeks before I was having to forge relationships, down the line. And I think you started relatively recently at your new job as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's not really a new job, so I've been doing it for a while, sorry. It's just a new title for the job that I was doing. Because I work on television with Red, which is part owned by Studio Canal. They just asked me to start developing British films with them as well. So it's not as big as it sounds. And I have been in the same office. I was doing that for the last 18 months. It's just been retitled. But it's Red, because we're only in development there, so that can still continue. It's more the Red shows that we're filming that have been impacted.
Yeah, and again, huge decisions having to be made and a lot of disappointment everywhere. Yes,
but we're just, we're using the power of positive thinking to make it happen. One show, we were in the middle of filming for ITV, a big drama, and we have 4 more weeks to shoot. So every week we kind of pretend we're going to start in a set date that we're made up, and then we watch that date go past, and then we make up another date, because no one knows anything really, but we will get that finished. And then another show we were just about to film for the BBC, so we were 2 weeks away from shooting. We had to decide whether to let everyone on a recce bus or not, but we ended up pulling them off and accepting that it wasn't going to happen. So our biggest challenge is to restage that as soon as we can. But I'm not kind of thinking that we'll rewrite them in any way or we'll change them, because I think in drama terms it's so far away from when they'll transmit. We just can't predict what world we're in. So we kind of think we should be in as positive a world as we can be.
Mm. Well, talking about positivity, before we get stuck into the nitty-gritty of the industry, I'd like to ask you, what are the pros and cons you found about working at home, and perhaps what are the things that you've discovered about yourself that you didn't know 6-7 weeks ago? Shall we start with David?
Well, I normally work at home. Basically I write all day and then I perform at night. And I think one of the things that happened was that, because I got a lot of requests and still am getting a lot of requests that begin, well, now you've got all this time. Maybe you'd like to do, this podcast and that podcast and this webinar and whatever. And the thing is, I don't think I've got more time because before I wasn't homeschooling. And to be frank, I wasn't doing as much cleaning and stuff like that, and generally organising my life, the minutiae of my life, as much as I seem to have to now. I think that I'll tell you one thing I've done, which may not be relevant to anyone, but I have never been very good at exercise, and I am actually exercising. Which is quite good for me as a writer, because normally when I'm writing, I just distract myself in a very unhealthy way by looking at the internet, every paragraph, every scene. I think, oh, now I must reward myself by going on Twitter for 20 minutes. And obviously I still do that, but something has compelled me, possibly the sense that being fit may ward off the illness if I get it, to do a bit of, so I do actually go for the walk every day. I box, I do Oculus boxing, VR boxing, and that's been, healthy. So your answer to the question, has it changed me in any way? Not enormously so far, because essentially it's my life made slightly weird, is really what it feels like. But I am, I may not look it, but I feel slightly healthier than normal.
Fatima, what about yourself? Are you missing Channel 4?
Massively. I'm missing the buzz of the office, really missing colleagues, and kind of missing all of that creative chat that you get with people, all of that kind of messing around, distraction from having to make difficult decisions or having to watch films that you don't particularly want to watch. So I miss all of that kind of distraction. I miss, what I don't miss is I don't miss travelling on the tube. I seem to be spending less money, but internet shopping is kind of making up for that. The thing that I do enjoy though is that weirdly family viewing has kind of come back again with my teenagers, where I am sitting on the sofa with them in the evenings and trying to find stuff to watch, and watching Friday night dinners with my boy and just seeing him kind of laughing uncontrollably kind of reminded me of what he used to be like when he was little, when he used to watch Mr. Bean. So kind of rediscovering that with him again has been really fantastic. So that's been really good. And like David was saying, you know, things around the house, you know, my husband is absolutely fantastic at cleaning now, and has taken on a lot of the chores of the house. So all of that kind of family world has kind of come back. And I live in a really lovely, sweet neighbourhood where where I don't do jigsaw puzzles, but people have started to do this jigsaw puzzle exchange, which I've thought has been quite sweet. And swapping things with people has been really nice. So this sense of community that people kind of talked about is actually real, which I would have doubted, but is real.
Leo.
I have a 7, a 5 and a 3-year-old, so I see absolutely no pros of working from home whatsoever. Obviously getting to see them and spend time with them is lovely, but from a working perspective, it's a constant challenge from about 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. And to kind of double down on Fatima's point, we're in a creative people business. The best ideas, the best formats, they come out of people spending time together and bouncing ideas back and forth. So for me and our business, I haven't really seen any pros in that respect. I mean, I guess it's been in some strange way, a bonding experience, even though we've been physically separated. So within the business, there's been a huge effort to arrange, company-wide Pilates and dance classes and a karaoke night and a quiz night. I guess I'm probably seeing more of my team and the staff than I would do in a normal week, but just not physically being in the office and having that buzz, I definitely think impacts upon our ability to creatively come up with new concepts. So I'm very much looking forward to getting out of the house and back into the office.
Whereas Nicola, I think before we started chatting, I think I heard you say that you were quite enjoying working at home.
Yeah, I think I'm made for this situation really, because I like not leaving the house much. I like only getting dressed from the waist up. I like having time to concentrate on scripts and having time to, I like being able to leave a script and walk down and empty the dishwasher and come back. I'm not hugely social. So for me, it suits me and it suits my mentality. I think, like Leo said, I'm missing the casual conversations that lead to something good in terms of creativity. So we're trying really hard to keep in contact all the time. But that's definitely difficult, because it's often what you say when you're talking about what you were watching last night that becomes a really good idea. But in terms of me personally, I could stay home forever.
Okay. Well, there are lots of people out there doing incredibly creative and inventive things. I mean, every day there's something new. What's jumped out at you guys that might have inspired you, perhaps? Can we start with, let's start with David.
Well, as I said earlier, I live in a constant battle as a writer with the internet and the distractions of the internet. I therefore would say that, because some of those distractions are really good, insofar as sometimes I click on something and I think that's incredible. And one thing which perhaps we'll come to later as part of the more generalized discussion is, I do think this is a time when, without wishing to sound depressing to everyone who's in TV, that the internet, I mean, it's a linked industry anyway, but the internet will be found to have won the cultural battle, if there is a battle between the internet and TV. Because the things that feel to me that they've risen here, that people have found communion in and have enjoyed, are basically things like, for example, there's a comedian called Sarah Cooper, an American comedian on TikTok, who does these sort of 2-minute lip syncs to Donald Trump's speeches in her house, and they're hilarious. Jerry Seinfeld actually mentioned her the other day, and that's all she does. She just does them really hilariously. That's the way she does them, is hilarious. But the form, I was only half aware of TikTok, I would say, before this pandemic, and now I've watched a lot of TikTok videos. I watched one this morning in which someone skated across an empty space, and someone else, a social distance away, lifted up an enormous blue tarpaulin and made it look like they were surfing over a wave. And honestly, I could have watched it like 6 or 7 times. And so what I would say is that the truth is, which is a complicated truth for people who work in long form storytelling, is that things that I feel have really stayed with me have been what the internet does incredibly well, which is very short, very punchy, funny, small bits of filming.
Fatima, do you think it will have an impact on, I'm slightly jumping off script, but will have an impact on the sort of programs that you'd be making, this short form content that David's talking about?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think it's also, and I kind of understand what David's saying, but I think that if you look at, I'm not going to go on about loads of stats, but people are coming back to linear, and the young are coming back to linear. If you look at the figures for Friday night dinner and SAS, the 16 to 34-year-olds watching those kind of shows have been phenomenal for Channel 4, and Gogglebox, which just feels like the most essential thing to watch at the moment, because it feels like that there's a truth there in terms of how we're viewing all of this. The kind of reach for youngs on those three shows has been great for Channel 4. I think the thing that I am so admiring of is how people are making creative decisions for much less money. If you look at Jamie Oliver's show, and how quickly we commissioned that on a Thursday, and it was on air, on that Monday, and made for peanuts. And the brilliant thing about Jamie was that we've almost like we reinvented him, because when we came there to try and start to film that show, obviously because of the situation around that, you couldn't do that. So Jamie had to actually start filming himself. And to me, his daughter filming him, and Jules filming him, and Buddy being there, and River has kind of reinvented Jamie and what he's actually done. And I think that he's brought in a new audience to that. And watching somebody like Steph McGovern, who is a fantastic broadcaster, and who is so committed to public service broadcasting, to kind of spend 3 weeks filming a new show from her home, and she's just, she's got a little baby, just shows to me a commitment that people have to public service broadcasting, which Channel 4 is part of, because they want to keep their audiences informed and entertained, and it really means a lot to them. So, to me, that's so brave and kind of really important, and it shows the role that I think television has still got. It's still got a massive role to play during this pandemic, and the kind of record audiences that people are getting for news, and this kind of thirst for information. And yes, you can get that from the internet, and you can get that from everywhere else, but actually you in terms of your most trusted source of news will obviously be the BBC. And I think they've done a fantastic job as a national broadcaster in all of their kind of lockdown academies and their cultural academies. And so for me, the role of television is just as strong as if not stronger.
Leo, do you echo those thoughts?
To a degree. I think that the role of television is always going to be a huge one. I think that where people are being inventive and creative around new content in lockdown, then that's fine. Personally, I'm kind of bored senseless of all of the stay-at-home shows where someone will throw to a talent to sing a song to you, and we'll get to cut to another celebrity who's crying along to the words. That became boring weeks ago, and it's remarkable how often these are still being churned out. Less so here in the UK, but certainly in the US, the networks are still relying on those kind of that kind of content. And I include the ones that Fulwell have been involved in as well. Those bore me equally. But where people are creative and where people do something different, one that leaps out to me is the Little Britain sketch, for example, that Matt and David did, or a lot of the content that Saturday Night Live have created. That stuff feels fresh, original. It doesn't feel like it's happening because we're in lockdown, but it's a great byproduct of it. So I think there's a mix. I definitely think that shorter form content has its place to play, although it's interesting to see that Quibi, which has launched while we're in lockdown and is entirely based around short form content, to my mind hasn't really done the numbers that we may have thought it would do. I don't know if that's because it's overly produced, and maybe the TikTok stuff is connects better with an audience. But I think we'll have to wait and see if the world changes when we come out of this.
Nicola, just on that question again, you know, any inspiration for you that's caught your imagination?
I'm always inspired by Jeff Pope. So I think the way that he managed to create isolation stories so quickly and so well done and so well written and with brilliant actors is really admirable. I slightly with Leo in that I don't want to watch hundreds of those, and I have been pitched hundreds of them, that I don't want to focus too much on what we're in now. I like to look a bit further afield. I think I at the very beginning as well was relying on BBC News in a way that felt like everyone's watching this and everyone's getting the same information, and it felt really comforting somehow. I think again I've totally moved away from that because I don't want to watch that anymore, and also because of the internet's there, you start questioning what you are hearing and who's reporting it and what people are saying and what's truthful and not. So I'm kind of less interested in that. I think for me it's about looking forward, and it's I think in drama there won't be a lot learned from the internet because we never do really, and also it seems to feel like the bigger you go, the more rewarding it is in television drama terms. So I think there'll be at the back of your mind obviously is what we're living through and what we're going to be like, but still I think storytelling is what comes through, whether it's short form storytelling, long form storytelling. It just has to be really good stories, and that's what inspires me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nicola.
No,
I just wanted to agree with something that Leo had said, which is I think one thing that is happening at the moment, which obviously is understandable, but I think is sometimes television is trying to do the same thing, but just under these circumstances. And I don't personally feel that always works. I think Fatima's right, it worked with Jamie Oliver, but one thing that for me that hasn't been working is things like Have I Got News for You, trying to do the same show, but just having people on screen and then losing any sense of the atmosphere or the comic euphoria that show can normally generate. And I'm not sure crowbarring in ordinary formats into this situation that we're in at the moment will always work. It works sometimes and not other times. And I'm not sure it works for comedy entertainment at the moment. I think it works in little bits, in bits that are very internet influenced. And I would say that sketch that Matt and David did is very internet influenced. Stuff I've seen SNL do is very internet influenced. Stuff that feels like it needs an audience is not working, I feel.
Well, let's go to the big question, shall we? Which is obviously how do we see production, working over the 6, 9, 12 months future? Fatima, shall we start with you?
Sure. I think that we are, as Nicola and Leo have said, kind of moving out of that first phase of kind of lockdown programming, and I think we need to kind of think about what we have got to start doing middle term and long term, and I think that in terms of some of the lessons that we've learned from TV production is that this whole question, particularly at Channel 4 in terms of the cuts that we've had to make to content budgets, is that we have got to look at how we can make existing shows cheaper. We need to look at how we can kind of, without sacrificing the content. And, to me, coming from as head of specialist factual and working in that factual world, that's something that we have really got to start thinking about. I think for us, we're going to be, we spend a lot of time interrogating ideas and, trying to cut out what developing these kind of middle of the road ideas are. I think that we've got to really interrogate what the right programme for our audience is going to be and what the audience wants and whether or not we can afford it and what our budgets are. And I think we've got to look at those programmes as to what impact are they doing for us and what impact are they, what are they doing for the audience and how are they working for us? Because we've got a lot of tough decisions to make at Channel 4 and as other broadcasters have as well in terms of our revenues coming down. I think that we've got to, we've got to really work harder as commissioning editors to make sure that that the ideas that we are getting, that we are in that position of kind of working them up in a way that you kind of feel that you're getting more for your buck. And I think that, people are still very worried about, 60% of the British public are still incredibly worried about kind of leaving their homes and, even if lockdown does end. And I think that we, especially in factual, have got to make sure that we are looking at ideas that, as well as kind of being this kind of lovely escapism, is still kind of reflecting that, and still kind of reflecting a sense of frustration that people are going to feel when they've got less money, when, you know, when the economy and what's happening to us really kind of kicks in. So for us, I think there are so many challenges there that we have got to make sure, and obviously I'm just talking about this from a factual point of view, that we've got to make sure that we are reflecting all of that. And how do we do all of that in this world of ad revenue falling, and, you know, and wanting to still kind of entertain and inform our audience? So I think those are the big challenges that we've got.
Nicola, what about drama? What are
Yes,
the
I think drama is nearly the opposite of that, just because of the nature of drama. I don't think our job is escapism, but I think our job is to not necessarily reflect back what everyone's going through, and make sure again that we tell really good stories. So what we're spending our time doing, almost all our time every day, is trying to work out how we can film the shows as they are written to a certain extent, and as soon as we're allowed to. So we are, you know, we're looking at the scripts we've got, like 4 weeks left on our ITV show. We're looking at, do we, you know, lose some locations? Do we lose crowd scenes? Do we, 2 characters have to just kiss once, and that suddenly feels like the biggest obstacle. So we're just talking through that. We're talking through how we work with crews, how we keep crews safe, how our production sets will look, whether we'll have the same crews, how our lunch times will look. You know, there's just 100 decisions, and we're looking at every other country as well, and guidelines they're putting out. But the truth is, we're making it all up, because until we know what the rules are going to be, we have to respond to them rather than, but we have to keep going. Our production team's been brilliant at talking to every other production team in the country, and what do you know, how would you shoot this, how would you shoot that. It's just constant talk about how we can film things, because in the end that's all we want to do, is we want to film. And drama is going to be more difficult than factual or entertainment, because sometimes people have to go near each other, and sometimes people have to touch each other, and sometimes people have to walk through a busy street, and that's part of the reality of life, and we can't take all that out. So it's how we don't damage our material, but how we can get them shot.
Leo, I saw you nodding a little bit there.
Yeah, we're finding the same thing. I mean, certainly from, again, we're also finding that at whatever point the government guidelines come in, I feel like on the drama side, for our projects, we're going to be guided just as much by the insurance requirements as we are by the government medical requirements. We already have had long conversations with the studios, the networks, about the shows and the film that we had to put on hold. And as an example, for our feature film that we're 4 weeks into a 12-week shoot on, we're now being told that, you know, every member of cast and crew will be looking at a 2-week isolation period away from family in a designated location, then go into isolation for the duration of the shoot, and then be advised to isolate for a further 2 weeks before they go back to family. So with 8 weeks left to shoot, for example, we'd be talking about asking our entire cast and crew, so close to 250 people, to spend 3 months away from their family, right at the point where lockdown ends. And the scary thing is that certainly for the crew, 99.9% of which are, you know, contract staff, freelancers, they're not going to have a choice. They're not going to have been paid for the time that we've been in lockdown. So now they're going to be asked to, or they're not going to be asked, their only option to get paid work is going to be to do this. It makes it almost impossible to complete some of the projects that we have on, alongside what Nicola said, which is reimagining a lot of the shoots. Large crowd scenes, for example. Can we move stuff off location onto stages where we can better manage it and control it? Is there going to be stage space, because there are projects that have been pushed that hadn't even started yet? So there's a huge number of considerations. And I actually think that until there is some form of vaccine, or we're a lot further down the line, that the scripted world is going to take a hell of a long time to get back to any kind of normality. In the unscripted world, I think that it's going to be far simpler, far more straightforward. And we already have various plans in place that we think are doable for a lot of the shows outside of the studio shows with an audience.
David, what about the world of comedy? Obviously, you touched on it earlier. What are the impacts on you? I know your tour has had to be postponed. Obviously, that's one. What else is happening?
Well, no one knows. Jimmy Carr called me a couple of days ago, just to say the words, "Are we fucked?" And he might be right, insofar as live comedy, straightforward live comedy. I mean, obviously there are other things that can happen, but the basic thing of a person with a microphone, the other thing they need is an audience. And there is talk, for example, of when theatres reopen, and no one knows when that will be, but that there might have to be social distancing whereby every other seat would be not full. So firstly, I don't know how financially sustainable that is, both for people doing plays and stuff, but also for comedy tours. And the other problem is, atmospherically, is that laughter in particular is a communal thing. I mean, I think that's true of drama as well, and what Nicola and Leo were talking about there is drama can't all be isolation stories. Drama has to involve interaction between people, and more than two people, otherwise you're not representing life as it's lived. But one part of that in a live setting is the brilliant and sort of, you know, key to comedy communal response of an audience all laughing together. And actually, I thought about this as I was doing the last bits of my tour. I had about 5 dates before the government straightforwardly imposed no mass gatherings. And I was getting quite a lot of stick on the internet from people saying you should just not do it. But I couldn't, and every other comedian was in this situation, I couldn't unilaterally call those gigs off because I could be sued by the venue and made to pay back everyone's ticket until the government says this is off. I don't have the responsibility to do that. But I was noticing a fear in the audience, and not just that I was going to be shit. I noticed that there was a kind of, you know, the gig still went well, and you could puncture it with references, but at the same time, and this is a very specific thing, laughter itself is infectious. And I don't mean that just in terms of laughter being, this is how the disease is transmuted. It's transmuted by people projecting out of their mouths, and actually laughter does that. It's like a cough to some extent. And you have this weird thing, like the better the gig's going, the more people are getting infected. And so even when it starts again, which hopefully it will, no one knows what the landscape will be or whether people will want to take the risk. I mean, for me, you know, I'm 55, my audience is probably over 40. That's again an issue. I think young people will go to gigs quicker. I think older people will be worried about it, even when the restrictions are lifted. So I don't know. What is happening, as everyone knows, is there's a lot of people doing really funny stuff online without audiences. I saw John Oliver's show, which I thought worked pretty well. That kind of show, that particular American kind of show, where someone's sort of ranting in a funny way about stuff shown on a screen, that kind of works. But shows, as I say, that involve an audience and involve interaction and all the rest of it, at the moment, they can't work in this situation. And so the truth is there's a lot of nervousness with comedians, and a lot of them don't know if their livelihoods can continue.
Do you think that, I'm going to throw this to the group, do you think that the government should give support? And if so, what sort of support to our industry? I'm going to throw that out to you guys.
Someone mentioned to me recently that if they, and I don't know how it would work, but if they were willing to back insurance companies, which sounds a strange thing, but insurance is going to be the key to get anything new started in drama. And if the insurance companies aren't going to take any risks, which everyone expects them not to, then if there could be a fund which somehow guarantees something for them if things go wrong, because I think in the majority of these cases, like your huge film, it won't go wrong. You know, I mean, there are, you know, the percentages are small, but obviously you can't take that risk. And some people won't want to take that risk when they work. But if somehow the insurance companies could be backed up, then possibly we could start sooner. But again, it's like we don't know those rules. I'm hoping that if we can test actors somehow, if there's an antibody test, you know, before the vaccine, I am hoping that we'll be able to start filming some kind of drama. But I keep being told to stop being so optimistic.
But to your point, we would need daily testing of the entire cast and crew. And I think if that was available, then everyone would feel more comfortable doing so. But without that and without a vaccine, I just don't know how we get back to that sense of normality.
Because I don't think we can ask people to isolate for that long. I don't think that is a realistic way of filming.
Yeah, maybe not.
I mean, it leads me to another question, which is a hard question, but it's interesting you talk about the testing as being key to your productions. What are the most important things that we should be doing within this business to help? What are the things that we should be looking at and focusing at and really trying to crack?
So for us, my personal opinion is that we need to be, those of us who run production companies, the most important thing is supporting our staff and making sure that they believe in the strength of this industry and the robustness of our production companies. I have a real fear that we're going to lose a whole bunch of young creatives through this process who might never find their way back into this industry. And if you do that, then you lose the next generation, the next lifeblood of creatives, and therefore you lose a ton of great ideas. And I think that a lot of companies, I'm not specifying which companies, but I think a lot of companies are looking, at the lower levels within their business, within development, for example, and that's an easy area to furlough or to set aside. And again, I'm not commenting on everyone has to do what they think is right to make, ensure their own business survives. But to my mind, those are exactly the people that we should be protecting as best we can. That to me feels like the most important thing. Not that it's not important if some more experienced people fall by the wayside, of course it isn't. But I think that younger generation of creatives are really the ones we should be trying to ensure are still here at the end of this.
I think that's a really important point that Leo's raised about the development team. So as a broadcaster and as somebody who's in terms of the last 6 weeks, a lot of the programs that we have got on air have come as a direct result of development teams basically working to a brief that we have picked up the phone and said, guys, can you think about this? Guys, can you think about that? An ever-changing brief. And I think that that's been the lifeblood of a lot of indies that we continue to work for. And, people who are investing in that generation of people in terms of the development people are the ones that are going to, in my opinion, kind of lead the industry forward, because our lifeblood is ideas, and our lifeblood is basically getting those ideas to air and finding people to make those programs. I think the other thing is that answering the phone to people and kind of being reassuring, but also being really honest to people, taking those calls and answering those emails from freelancers who we might be friends with. We were at some point freelancers ourselves, and we were so you're able to kind of really understand that world that they're coming through. Just doing this kind of stuff where we are talking to people, be it at Screen Skills or where you're joining forces with other broadcasters, kind of saying to people, try and use your time in the best way you can and try and do this and think about X, Y, and Z, but also trying not to forget those people who might not have a subscription to broadcast or to the H Club or to Soho House, and all of those people that might not have your number or my number on speed dial, and trying to reach out to them to basically say to them, as Leo has said, that you're going to lose a generation of people that are from those BAME industries and people from those kind of worlds who don't have those brilliant connections that a lot of other people do. And I think it's really, really important for people like us to kind of reach out to those people and say, we're going to try and help you, in whatever way we can.
I think one thing that Richard said, which might be helpful in a very small way, is that you said, what should the government do? I think we should be aware as an industry that we are low down on the government's sense of priorities. I mean, I read today in terms of the future generation that, and this is probably right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but that the first students to go back to university will probably be science students, and arts and humanities will be later because they're considered to be less important at the present time. And it seems to me that the way that society will start again, they'll start schools first, they'll start essential businesses first, they'll start factories, whatever. And TV, drama, theatre, blah, 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 will be low on the list. And I think what we could do is try and remind the government and the culture in general that actually what sustains the culture at a time like this is TV, film, comedy, drama, that actually popular art forms are incredibly important to keep, for want of a better word or phrase, the morale of the nation going. at a time like this. So it would be good for the government not to think, well, that doesn't matter compared to the obviously important things that we have to sustain.
Nicola, do you want to add anything?
No, that all makes sense to me. We're trying really hard to help our freelancers in every way that we can, and I think you're totally right about that younger generation, who we need to make sure, and what we do is that we keep reading them and we keep having meetings with them and we keep encouraging people. I think all that, the stuff that you talk about, David, that's on the internet is great, but very few people are getting paid for any of that.
No,
and that's, so again, giving away brilliant content. So we have to make sure that they are rewarded in the end for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to looking forward, I think. And I really want to ask the question, what kind of content are we all going to be wanting to watch in a year or a year and a half down the line? Do you think it's going to change what we want to watch? Having been stuck at home watching old 80s movies, in my case, what are the things that you think people are going to be hungry to watch in the future? David, let's start with you.
Well, I've sort of made this point already, but one of the conversations that I've had a lot about, whether it be for TV ideas or for this play that I've got upcoming, is how much or how little does one incorporate the pandemic into this future project that may or may not happen. And it's very complicated because no one knows what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen in actuality, and no one knows how much people will want to know or reflect back on this time in 2 years' time. And yet, if you want to write a drama, for example, I have a drama at the moment which feels very contemporary, and it wouldn't make much sense to me to set it before this, because by the time it comes out, that means you'd have to set it as a period drama, and it's almost as a period drama is any time before the pandemic. You'd have to set it before this, and that would feel false. At the same time, it's very hard to write it and know what to say about it. And I don't feel, I could be wrong about this, but I don't think that people will want to constantly see reflected back on TV and film stuff about the pandemic. At the same time, it will be almost impossible to write anything because our generation hasn't had such an all-encompassing event, global event. It'll be impossible to write anything, even a romance. As Nicola says, people kiss in a romance. In my play, there's a key moment where someone touches someone else, having been told throughout the whole play they mustn't touch. And that takes on a whole different meaning than it did 6 months ago. Mm. So I'm not really answering your question because I don't know. But my question is that I think the problem for creatives creating stories is the stories that we're creating now, we don't know how much or how little to reflect this time. I would hope that after an initial burst of it, it is something that won't be continually having to be kind of absorbed into every single story you tell.
Fatima, Channel 4 seems to be one of the broadcasters that's really embracing, broadcasting related to coronavirus. Are you looking at ideas for a year ahead, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we spend so much time thinking about this now, as we've kind of come out of that phase. I think that what I'm really excited about is that I think that people have got a real willingness now to explore things from a different perspective. And I think people are much more open to kind of looking at different worlds, looking at climate change, for me as especially a factual person, looking at climate change and what that means now. So it's not just dominated by plastic anymore, it's dominated by so much else, so much more about biodiversity and so much more about what we've learned from this phase, that I think David is right, and that you're not going to want it so on the nose, but people have got a real thirst, I think, for experts, and I think experts have come back in fashion, science has come back in fashion, and people are looking to those people to kind of give them answers. And I think that our challenge is how you put an entertainment or how you put a factual kind of shell around that and make that incredibly appealing to an audience. I think audiences you know, they want some kind of, you know, when I talk about escapism, I think we don't just mean kind of warm bath stuff, which is, you know, country file or kind of going around, you know, the beautiful things that, you know, Spring Watch will give us and all of this kind of stuff. I think that escapism can be everything from kind of, you know, Tiger King to, you know, kind of investigative crime, all of that kind of world. That I think that those are some of the things that we're looking at. I think that audiences are still, when they come out of lockdown, are still going to feel, as I said before, a kind of sense of frustration. And I think that they will want to look for some kind of bright escape, but they'll also want to look at what does travel mean now in this kind of post-corona world, and what does that actually look like from a TV point of view. And I think that, you know, all of those areas are something that we're all totally trying to think about, but also not to forget the time that people are going to come out of this world extremely skint. And so people are going to have to, we're going to have to think about how do we address that, and how do we, you know, how do we kind of look at those kind of worlds as well without making people feel really, really depressed.
Nicola, what about yourself? What sort of ideas are you looking at or beginning to look at?
Not corona ideas. I think we accidentally made or very cleverly made the corona drama with Years and Years 2 years ago. So I feel like, you know, if you're looking at international difficulties, we did that then. I think that because the kind of dramas that we make will not be out for 18 months, then we have to look ahead. We have to look ahead. And I think the world will be impacted, but my instinct is that what's going to make a good drama still is a really good story. So it you know, whether we adapt what we have slightly, but I don't think we'll damage story in order to reflect an immediate post-corona environment, because, you know, by the time our dramas will be on, I'm hoping that it will be a piece of history. And so that it's like David just said about a period drama, corona will be a period drama, because hopefully we will have moved on, we'll be in a different world again. Everyone will have learned lessons from it, or you know, be scarred by it, but they won't want it in the immediate present, is my instinct. But obviously that's just an instinct, and that's all you can go by.
Leo.
Yeah, we're betting on exactly the same thing as Nicola just laid out. Nothing to do with COVID or Corona. We're going joyous, uplifting content that makes you smile, which is pretty much all we do anyway. So no great change there. But yeah, it just needs to be compelling storytelling. The projects that we have, that we're either in the midst of shooting or we're set up and ready to shoot, we're not changing them to reflect the world that we're now in. Partially to David's point, because we don't know what world we're going to end up in, and partially to Nicola's, in that by the time it comes out, there is the hope and the belief that the world will be back to far closer to a sense of normality.
Okay, so I'm going to go to a couple of questions from people who are watching the panel. This is from Adam Goot. He says, once lockdown is fully over and there are no restrictions, will there be a creative boom or a bust? Who would like to go for that?
I don't think creativity stopped. I think making things has been really difficult, but in terms of, we're constantly having conversations about ideas, and writers are writing a lot. So I don't see that suddenly there'll be a release of new ideas. I think that's happening right now. I think in terms of boom or bust, I don't think there's going to be any money. So I think everyone is aware of that. So that there will be bust everywhere, really.
Yeah,
I think that's true. In terms of creativity, I mean, we're still pitching on a daily basis, new ideas, new shows. So yeah, I think creativity has certainly not stopped because of the coronavirus.
History would suggest that there is a bit of a euphoric cultural response to very bad global events. There was to some extent an outpouring after the First World War in the 20s. Obviously, it then went very wrong, but initially there was, and you could say as well in the 50s after the Second World War. One very small sort of technical point is, and there'll be other people on this panel who will be clearer on this than me, is won't there be an enormous backlog? I mean, someone was talking about this yesterday, of stuff which was stalled and then needs to be broadcast, and then all this stuff that's been developed. How, you know, will there not be something of a bottleneck in terms of getting it all out when it can be broadcast?
Something's going to have to give. We've seen that a lot of the networks in the US have cancelled pilot season altogether. So all the pilots that were ordered have now disappeared, and they're going straight to series orders. And the question is, what will happen in 2021? Will they be doing exactly the same thing? I think that's absolutely right. And the bottleneck will be caused also by the availability of stages to shoot on, by the availability of crews and even lead talent. I don't think any of us know how that's going to play out. But yeah, I think we've probably got, I would say we've probably got 36 months of that ahead of us before there's a clear pathway.
Okay, well, we're very near the end now, just a couple of minutes away. So I just wanted to ask you a slightly more positive question to end on. We've all been watching a lot of content at home. What TV series, or one TV series, film or piece of content would you recommend people to watch, and why? Just one piece, please. We'll start with Nicola.
The thing that I got very invested in, which I didn't think I would, and had only started watching because of this, really, because of having a little bit more time, is The Morning Show, which just felt pure and utter escapist. And not escapist in that way, not about warm and happy people and the world is all perfect. It just felt so far away from sitting in your house, and actually, I think, really well crafted and really well acted, and just looking at the glamour and beauty of busy New York streets felt great. So I would recommend that, definitely. David,
what about you?
Well, that's a very good choice. I think The Morning Show has been massively underrated in terms of critical response. It was also the first drama to take on Me Too in a complicated and interesting way. I thought it was really brilliant. But my choice is Bojack Horseman, without any question. Bojack Horseman is an animation on Netflix. It's written by a guy called Raphael Bob Waxberg. It's got Will Arnett in it. Animation we haven't talked about. Animation is probably the least affected, as far as I can make out, industry that we could think about in these terms, because obviously people can still draw and they can still do voices. I'm actually doing a voice, and Morwenna, who my wife, who is in Peppa Pig, has been doing Mummy Pig from home. So that's great news, especially for Leo's children. But the Bojack Horseman is just unbelievably funny, unbelievably heartwarming at the same time, but never in a syrupy way. And is also like 12 series long. So you can really, really binge on it.
Brilliant. Leo?
The new Michael Jordan 10-part doc series on Netflix, The Last Dance, is I would recommend to everyone and anyone. That's, to my mind, the standard by which all sports docs should now be judged.
Fatima, you're nodding.
I was going to say exactly the same. The Last Dance, I absolutely love it. And I was watching that and I was thinking that there's so many lessons that we could learn from that archive. Brilliant, brilliant interviewees. I would just love a little taste of that in any kind of programs that we can get. I just think sports docs are so underrated, and I've absolutely loved watching them. I think the opening sequence of Maradona is just brilliant, and it's kind of, I just think that they are so informative about our world and who we are as people, and say so much about society. And I think The Last Dance is absolutely, I think it's spot on. I think it's great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Our time is up. Fatima, Nicola, David and Leo, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.